Welcome, everyone. Joining us today is Andrew Brodkey, a seasoned leader with over 30 years of experience in the mining industry. Andrew is both a mining engineer and a lawyer, bringing a couple of unique blends of technical expertise and strategic visions. He has held senior executive roles at leading mining operations, corporations, and consulting firms, driving projects from exploration to development. Andrew's expertise expands over corporate business development, M&A, regulatory compliance, and project valuation. Currently leading Idaho Corporation and advising battery metals. Andrew is shaping the future of mining and energy sector. Welcome, Andrew.
Hi, thank you, Raj. Glad to be here this morning on a beautiful day here in Texas, where I'm currently at. It's going to be
That's
about
amazing.
75 degrees and just waiting for the fall to come, basically.
I get that. The weather is too hot. No worries. Tell me, Andrew, what are the top qualities or factor you believe makes a mining project valuable in today's environment?
Well, Raj, that's a question that we always ask when we look at a project and do some evaluation. But normally, to check the box on projects, first and foremost, it has to qualify on a technical basis. There has to be a really good mineral endowment. It has to be a mineral that people want and that there is a need for in the market. It has to be of enough grade. Grade is very important these days, as we're seeing declining grades across much of the landscape on projects that have been in operation for many years. So grade is important. Location is incredibly important too. When you're talking about doing exploration, let's say on a project that only accommodates helicopter exploration, you can start looking at a huge exploration budget. Not to say that those projects don't have merit, but they just cost a lot more to actually do the exploration on and ultimately bring into development. So you got to have all those types of technical factors in your favor. I mentioned grade, but that's only part of the story. You have to be in an area that allows a project to be permitted. Permitting is a gigantic issue, especially here in the United States. There's a lot of pushback from the environmental community, from local community at times, from governments. It's not easy to put a project into operation, even before that, to even do exploration, development, and lead to operation here in the U.S. because of the plethora of environmental laws, rules, and regulations, both federal, state, and local. So a project has to essentially, as I said earlier, check the boxes on a number of these different areas to be meritorious and be worthy of pursuing. There are some projects that are just located in areas that are so sensitive that they'll never be developed. And those probably, even with a fantastic mineral endowment, those likely will have to be avoided. But otherwise, we look for projects that are in mining friendly places where we are fairly assured that the technical work is going to be favorable in terms of an outcome, and that ultimately you're going to be able to permit the project and bring it into development and production. So that's when I look at a project, that's really what I strive to be able to encounter.
That's really, really insightful. I do believe keeping these things in mind is very crucial to decide any of the mining operation you go forward with. Tell me, with the mining industry facing both regulatory and social pressures, how do you approach a balance profit with let's say, responsible practices?
Every mining company today, whether it's exploration, in development, or production, has to be very cognizant of the regulatory environment and has to be an environmental steward. We've come a long way from the practices of 2 centuries ago or 150 years ago, when people walked in and essentially blasted the hillsides with water cannons and put gold into solution and then recovered it with amalgam and mercury, and that left a lot of environmental damage behind. Nobody can live like that today. So companies have to be very, very aware of what they are approaching when a project is being considered. So when we walk into a project, we are eyes wide open. We know we have to be environmentally aware. We know we have to be a very, very good steward of the environment. We have to not only comply with all the regulations, but we have to use best management practices. We have to essentially, especially if you're on federal land here in the United States, There are it's just a huge web of different regulations that mandate what you can do, even at the exploration stage. You just have to be very aware of what's required. You have to be able to satisfy the requirements of the regulation. So if you have, for example, a sensitive or a threatened and endangered plant or an animal on your property, you have to absolutely be able to account for it. You have to be able to mitigate the effects of what your exploration, and not to mention further down the road, your development and actual operational activities look like. But even early at the exploration stage, you have to comply with and be very, very keen on making sure that you have no environmental impacts that come out of even your drilling and your initial exploration activities. So those are things that every mining company today has to observe. Now, even despite all that, we see problems. We see areas, for example, if you look at what's happened in Brazil over the last decade or so, we've had big failures of tailings dams. We've had people killed. We've had communities wiped out. And how do you mitigate against that? Well, you've got to do the work up front. You've got to make sure you don't put a tailings dam in a position upstream where a failure could hurt the environment or people or communities downstream. You've got to make sure that all your technical work is done absolutely to a degree that supports what your project is ultimately going to look like. So there's just a lot of work that's got to be done on the front end before a mine goes into actual development and operation. I think that a recent study, I believe it came out of the University of Michigan here in the United States, there's a lag time from discovery to actual operation of like almost 30 years. And so we're really, really heavy on the time that it takes to bring a project all the way through. I'm not saying it's right or it's wrong. It's just a fact. That's what it is today. But all that work that goes into making your project ultimately operational and bringing the economic benefits to the community has to be weighed against, bringing back to your question, Raj, has to be weighed against the balances of social and the cultural and the economic and the environmental impacts that the project brings. So in the end, it is a balancing act. Can you, on the economic side, obviously bringing a lot of benefits into the community and to the region, can you balance that out favorably against what the effects of your project, the environmental effects that your project may conjure up? And the answer in a lot of cases is yes, you can. You can satisfy both masters. You can make things work economically, and you can protect the environment and the community and help at the same time. So that's what happens with a lot of these projects. But again, I can't emphasize this enough. There are some projects that are just in areas that no matter what you do, they can't be built. There's a lot of history to that. There's a couple big companies that have invested billions of dollars in projects that unfortunately, for them at least, the project can't go forward. But most of the time, I think that the answer is yes. The balance works and the project should be prosecuted and should ultimately be operational.
No, I do totally understand. That was a very deep insight from your end itself. With all your corporate experience itself, what do you think? What is the biggest risk in mining today? And how can small companies, especially, effectively manage or mitigate them?
The biggest risk to a project, from my perspective, isn't on the technical side. There's so much work that's been advanced in terms of understanding what a deposit looks like. The phrase, which I didn't make this up, but I like it a lot, is hear what the deposit is telling you from a geologic perspective. If you understand your deposit well enough, you've done all the work necessary to go into really having a deep dive into the mineralogy and the geology and understanding all the faults that exist inside of the ore body itself. And you understand the methodologies that are going to be used to determine the necessary equipment to extract the material and then process it. These are areas that are very well understood, have been around for decades. They're getting improvement on them as well. So I shouldn't downplay that part of it. But on the technical side, it's not a gigantic risk normally. There are certainly, in some situations, particularly in underground mines, where there are faults that affect the ability to extract ore, and there are dilution issues. above ground and below ground. But just, I'm saying technology has come a long enough way that we understand, I think, what the ore body tells us and how to extract it. So that isn't the big risk. The big risk on my side is the permitting and the political risk. A lot of countries I choose not to work in because I think that there's enough work for me here in North America and South America for most of my career anyway. But in the developing world, the political risk is immense. There is so much that goes on in a project that leads to, you can see the number of lawsuits that come out of these. Well, where you've got, for example, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, where people are essentially bribing officials in third world countries, developing countries, to allow for mining licenses to be granted. Those are things that are real and they need to be eliminated. But that's a kind of a geopolitical risk that I choose not to participate in because the countries I work in, particularly here in North America, we don't have those types of problems. But apart from all that, let me get back again to the risk of permitting. The U.S. looking at a lag time again of 3 decades to get a project from discovery all the way to operation is difficult. It's hard to tell your shareholders that they have to be patient. Look, we've got another permitting hurdle to essentially cross. You need to stick with us. And shareholders and investors have shorter term, much of the time, have a shorter term viewpoint. They want to get in and out. They want to make a profit. They want to move on. And so to tell somebody they have to be around for 30 years is a daunting challenge for them. So that's where I see the big risk. And I wish we could make it easier here in the U.S. I think there's a lot of movement now in our federal government to streamline the permitting process. There are some existing avenues that do exist, like the Fast Track 41 system that allows projects to be permitted faster. But I don't think the permitting side, from the perspective of dealing with the federal agencies, particularly here in the U.S., the Bureau of Land Management and the Forest Service, they're staffed by competent people. They're okay to work with. They have the same goal that you do. When you have a piece of federal land where you located an unpatented mining claim, it's a multiple use of that particular land, whether it's a BLM land or if you're in a national forest. And I think the agencies understand that and they want to help you because mining is a use of the land. So I don't see the permitting side being that difficult from the perspective of working with the state and federal agencies. Rather, it's the litigation risk that comes along with your project. So let me be more specific. The permitting risk really devolves into the litigation risk. That's the big, what I'd call bugaboo that exists with projects, especially here in the U.S. Because what happens invariably when a project is approved by a federal agency, whether it's an exploration project or whether it's a development project into operations, after you've done your permitting under the National Environmental Policy Act of 1970, NEPA, you've done all your permitting, you're going to get a court challenge no matter what. And the environmental groups live off of this sort of methodology, and it's their perfect right to do so. But what happens is these projects keep getting delayed and delayed and delayed, and it takes the court an inordinate amount of time to be able to resolve some of the issues. The legal standard for whether the agency has done their job in giving you a permit, for example, is quote unquote, are they taking a hard look at the environmental effects of your project and has everything been passed? But man, there's a lot of how should I put it? A lot of loose interpretation of what is a hard look. And the NGOs, the environmental groups, challenge you every step of the way if they don't want a project. And I would say 95% of the time they don't want a project. And
Yeah.
this is what we live with. So it's litigation risk when it finally and fully comes down to where I see the biggest problem here, at least in the U.S., litigation risk.
Well, I am from India, third world country. What I can say you that in my country, the highest amount of risk is not corruption but mafia. You got to deal with a lot of mafia people when you when they get to know that the mine which we are going to start have rich amount of resources. Handling I think the government is not that big of a task for India itself because again, corruption is there. So, like, just give the money and get the things done. It's unethical, but then that's how you do things when you're a third world country. Probably from my angle, mafia is one of the most crucial things we were at, and we are like developing certain mechanisms on how to mitigate that risk. Also, we have
Well, we
talked.
don't have that here. We don't have mafia that
Yeah,
controls
definitely.
the mining industry. But every country has their own problems. I've worked in Latin America. I won't name the countries, but even there is some corruption at times. Court officials can be influenced with money. It's not a clean slate almost anywhere you go. But we don't have a corruption risk here in the U.S. But we do have, as I mentioned before, the biggest risk to a project is how long is it going to take to get it into operation, and that is a function of how much delay is going to happen inside our court system. Now, fortunately, there are some bills in front of Congress now, some bipartisan bills, which I do hope go through, that have been proposed to put some restrictions on the timelines inside of the legal process. That'd be great if it happened, because I think it would give a lot more certainty to investors in my industry. So I hope that with our new administration coming in, that will move along forthwith.
No, definitely. We have talked about the project viabilities, regulatory, social pressures. Risk. Tell me about like what are the best signs for a mining project to worth investing in, and the future of mining in general. Like, what are the trends and shifts are you observing which will get affected in the next 22 decades?
Well, I think I've told you already my thoughts on what makes a worthwhile project. It's got to have the mineral endowment, has to have all the technical details worked out. It's got to be in a location where you can develop the project. So breaking that down a little bit, it has to have good access. It has to have water availability nearby, or the ability to bring water in. Needs to have access to power, whether that's grid electric power, whether it's power that can be generated, let's say, by a hydrogen sort of a system. There's a lot of work being done in that area, by the way, in hydrogen fuel cells for actual mobile equipment and hydrogen hubs. So in a lot of cases, you need to have natural gas nearby as well. And infrastructure, like I said, road access. You have to have access to workforce. You need to be in an area or in a state, let's say, or a location where mining workforce is around. And I can say, fortunately, in our case, for my current company, we're in an area where it's a state that Idaho that has a lot of mining history, and there's a lot of skilled mining technical workforce available. So those are the sorts of the building blocks you need to make sure that, again, on the technical side, that your project obviously makes the grade on all those characteristics you need. But beyond that, you have to have those things basically in place, and you have to have a favorable regulatory environment as well. You don't want to be in a state where the local and the state regulators don't want to mine. But we don't have that problem normally in the western part of the United States, where I've done most of my work. So those are what makes up, as I summarized earlier, a decent project to take a look at. Where's the industry going? Well, we have, as I think everybody understands, a giant gap between the demands of our country with respect to minerals and globally with respect to minerals, because a lot of these commodities, particularly copper and zinc and other base metals, as well as precious metals, are traded on global worldwide exchanges. So you'll see that there is a deficit between, especially on the base metal side, a deficit that's growing between the demand for these metals and the current supply. The reasons for these are very well understood. We're in a worldwide commitment to a net zero result on carbon emissions. We need to electrify the world in places where currently there isn't access to power. There is a transition from a carbon-based energy source economy to one where we're working more with renewables. So that takes form in various ways. The electric vehicle side of the equation, not maybe coming into actual practical application as fast as people understood, but eventually it will happen. The use of renewable energy, such as wind farms and solar farms, which require all the metals we're talking about. Copper, for example, 4 times in a pure electric vehicle, a plug-in electric vehicle, 4 times the amount of copper is needed in that type of a auto versus the amount of copper that goes into a normal internal combustion powered vehicle. There's just a need for every one of these metals. You can look up and down the periodic chart. I haven't talked about rare earths, but we need rare earths as well, which are used in many defense type applications and in magnets. Uranium is needed. There's certainly, and then the uranium price has responded over the last couple of years positively to the idea that maybe the nuclear energy future is a lot brighter than it was a decade ago. Things are happening in that area. Again, look up and down the periodic chart at all the metals and understand that we just don't have enough of these to satisfy the incredibly robust demand for these metals. So my outlook fundamentally is that the industry is experiencing what I call a renaissance. It's an industry that people don't really like that much when you talk to them about it, but it's one of the fundamental building blocks of our society, along with agriculture. As the saying goes, if it's not grown, it's mine. And people don't quite understand what it takes, for example, to construct their vehicle. So they get into their Mercedes or their Toyota or whatever. They don't really get it. Where'd the metal come from? They don't think about things like that. But that's what our industry lives for. We have to produce the iron ore that makes the steel and the aluminum and the copper and everything else that goes into those vehicles. So it's an industry that has a great future, but a lot of what we've got to do, and this has been going on for decades now, is to educate the public and get a little more, how should I put it, a little more understanding from the men and women on the street about what this industry is about and why it's important, not only to the U.S., but to the world. So I think we've got a great future, really, because the basic economics tell you that we need these metals and they have to be produced. They got to come from somewhere. So I'm bullish on my particular part of the industry. I'm a copper person. Copper is probably one of the most fundamental metals that's used in so many different applications and in so many different places around the world. I just think I'm in the right place and have been for the last 35 years in the copper business.
No, definitely. Even from my perspective, what intrigues me more about the mining industry, it is one of the most prestigious industry in the world. Without miners, there won't be any other industry in the world. That's what I believe. We are the backbone of most of the industries right here. So again, if we are able to play it well, if my generations also get aware about how to make it through, how to learn from individuals like you, have the right policies, have the right ethical practices, have some younger innovation, probably mining industry is gonna definitely flourish in the next upcoming few years. Coming to my last question, Andrew, I had a lot of conversations with a lot of women leaders. There is not a space for them to grow. And for that, I am trying to set up an initiative on making a women accelerator program in mining, where I would be educating women about the mining industry coming from different industries also, basically focused upon women empowerment in mining industry. What is your take on this itself?
Well, the statistics don't lie. I think the mining workforce today is about 17% women, probably even less representation by women inside corporations, corporate boards, and executive positions, but that is changing. For example, SME, the Society of Mining, Metallurgical, and Petroleum Engineers, has WIM, Women in Mining chapters in almost every state. But where it needs to start is that women need to, I think, become more active in the mining academic side of things. They need to elect to if it can be done. We need to help them understand that this is a career that can be very rewarding. So having more women enter the fundamental programs that make up mining, entering into programs to become geologists, to become mining engineers, to become geotechnical engineers, to become metallurgical engineers. Those are the types of fields I think that women can flourish in and make the ratios a lot more even with respect to participation in the industry. We also need more technical people. We need people that are able to be pipe fitters and welders, and those are obviously very traditional male jobs. So there's no reason why women can't participate in those as well and do as good or a better job than a man. So I say, yeah, anything that you have and are designing that can result in more involvement from women in different aspects of the mining industry would be welcome. But it's not something that is unheard of, not something that people are astonished by that, oh, well, we haven't done this. There's a lot of work that's already being done, but much more can be, because women can be very, very significant contributors. So I would suggest you take a look at some of these WIM, Women in Mining chapters, and you can see some of the things that they're accomplishing, because there's still a long way to go, but it is underway.
Yesterday, I just had an interview with Anita Burtonson. She's one of the ex-presidents of Women in Mining. So we had a really great conversation about how we need women leaders, not even women leaders, we need women engineers, we need women technical aspects in order to grow and empower women. Because even I had conversations with few people from my generation. People are studying geology in Columbia University. People of my age, especially girls, are not really interested in mining. They have a mindset that this is a dirty business and they don't want to get into it. Even if they don't have any significant influence in their growing up age, that if her father is not a miner, the person does not want to even consider getting into this field. So
Yeah,
that's what I feel my generation is lacking. But then again, if we are able to educate upcoming entrepreneurs via several accelerator programs, why not mining also? Because this is the base of each and everything. And you say about dual use technologies, US government is highly emphasizing that rare earths are required in the world right now.
yeah.
For
Well,
US,
I know Anita, by the way. I've spoken with her before. She does a lot of placement of mining staff into companies like mine. So yeah, very familiar with what she does and the need for that particular service in the industry. But it goes beyond when you look at fundamentally what's happening with the industry today. And I spoke to a group not long ago at the Idaho chapter of SME. I was part of a group that was talking to students that were from the geology department at Boise State University. I told them this: you folks, you young folks, are in a wonderful position, an enviable position. And the reason is that there are so many people in the industry today that are near retirement age, and there was a big gap anyway in the late '90s, going probably from early '90s to the call it 2005, where nobody wanted to get into the mining business at all. It's still a challenge today to get them in, but there's a gap of seasoned people in the business today that is reflected by just not enough help, not enough people that are technically oriented that are coming out of the mining schools. There are only 13 mining schools left in the country today. There were more when I started. Obviously, things were a little bit different back in back in the 1980s. But look at what's going on today. There's just not enough people. And I told these young geologists, you guys are coming into a profession at an incredibly wonderful time. Almost every one of you, as long as you had decent grades, coming out of a decent school, you're going to get a job, and these jobs pay well.
yeah,
And I was telling them, I'm working, for example, on a couple of projects with some geologists, and the youngest geologist is 73 years old and wants to retire, and the oldest one is 80.
oh my
They still
God, that's
and they
youngest and oldest.
yeah, and they still like working, but there's a time when they're not going to be around any longer physically, or they just don't want to do it. And that type of talent needs to be replaced. So we need to get younger engineers, geologists, and other other important technical people into the business now and learning from the older folks so that they can take the reins. It's just an absolute necessity. So you, Raj, are coming in at, as I would say, an incredibly opportune time.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And it was a pleasure speaking to you. The insights which you have given, it's really, really deep. And I believe the audience will really like it. A perspective from a highly experienced folk who has done a lot of things in life, who is currently working in a mine right now, leading several people. This conversation will definitely teach a lot of people of my generation. Thank you so much, Andy, for joining me for today's interview. I really appreciate that. And have a
You're
great day.
welcome. I enjoyed it too. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.